Hi, everyone. My name is Al D, and I'm excited to be here today. I'm a BC alum from the class of 2010 and a former management consultant at Deloitte Consulting.
Good to have you, Al. So Al, first question for you. May you kind of explain what your role in consulting was, where you worked, and what was the ins and outs of your job?
Yeah, happy to do that, Andrew, and thanks for having me. So previously, I spent my career working as a management consultant at the intersection really of strategy and technology for Deloitte Consulting. And it was really my job to help companies think about, with all this new innovative technology, how do we incorporate it into our overall company strategy? And then how do we move the organization in a way so that they can start adopting these new technologies into their own day-to-day processes and their own ways that they engage with customers? When I think about consulting, very fundamentally, like at a very, very simple level, it's helping solve business problems or helping companies take advantage of potential opportunities. And as a consulting organization, it's your job to have the knowledge of the market, to have the best practices from working with lots of different companies like the one you're serving, as well as having your own general insights about the industry or the function to be able to assess really what the client's challenge is, and then to generate solutions that will help the client move forward in a way that solves the specific challenge or helps them take advantage of the opportunities that exist. Sometimes I like to use the analogy, if you're trying to explain your job, how would you explain it to a 5-year-old? And I always like to say that being a consultant is just being like a doctor for a business, right? You go to a doctor because you might be sick and you need to understand what your symptoms are and how to find a solution. Or you also might go to a doctor because you are going in for your regular checkup and you're looking for opportunities to improve your health. And that is very similar with a business as well. So what does that mean? I think it means a couple things. In terms of skills of what a consultant does or what they need to do to be successful, I think number one is just intellectual horsepower. And that sounds like a little bit of a buzzword, but all that really means is being genuinely interested and curious and being about insights and information and trying to not only uncover that, but then to synthesize it in a way that can be presented to a client. And that sometimes can mean being able to analyze client data. That could mean analyzing best practices or knowledge that's stored internally within your company. That could be analyzing knowledge or research that exists in the market. But all it really means is being able to take some data information, synthesize it, and then talk about it in a way that's convincing to a client. The second skill is just the ability to learn. You will, particularly early on in your career as a consultant, you'll be put in lots of positions where you are expected to participate in something that you may not have expertise in. That's normal for being junior in your career, and that's okay. But what they want you there for is the ability to sink your teeth in, get up to speed as fast as you can, and find a way to contribute. And so if you are someone who has an ability to learn and learn fast, you will be served well as a consultant. The third, I guess, skill is just what I like to call client readiness. Working as a consultant, you're in front of clients all day, or virtually you're in front of clients. And most firms, particularly for those who are coming out of college, what they really want are people that they can feel comfortable engaging with a client, whether it's through a virtual meeting, whether it's through email communications, or whether it's through actually being in person in a physical meeting and presenting in a room or facilitating a workshop. And so being able to not only engage with others in dialogue and to communicate professionally, but also to do so in virtual and written communications are really important. And then maybe the last skill that's important is just the ability to work with diverse groups of people. On a given project, you might have different people across the globe that you're working with on your team. You might have a client who is in different geographies, and you have different people that you're supposed to work with who you're meeting for the first time. And so if you can have an ability to learn how to work well with others, regardless of their background or where they're from, that will also serve you well in a role as a consultant.
So now shifting out, a question to kind of centered around your case team. Could you kind of explain what your case team looks like, maybe how many people are on the team and some of the various roles on the team?
Sure. And I'm going to be very cliche here, but true to the consulting lingo, the answer is that it depends. And any good consultant will always give you that answer, but it does depend. But I'll give you some general guidelines for what you typically tend to see. So, number one, a case team will always have some kind of partner or managing director who is in charge of owning the overall client relationship, but is probably going to be the most experienced person, on the case itself. They may not always be involved every day, but they typically, at the very highest of levels, own the relationship with the actual client itself. And engage in some of those executive level conversations. Maybe they have a previous relationship with working with that client or that customer. And in addition to being able to manage that relationship and to keep them abreast at the highest levels of what's going on, having been around for the longest and having the most experience, they're often providing really that specialized expertise just from having that, that 15, 20 years worth of industry experience or in consumer products, or that 15 to 20 years worth of industry or functional experience in marketing or sales or whatever it is. And so for those really times in the project where you need that expertise, they really come in handy. What you might also see are engagement managers, or these are the folks who typically run the engagement day to day. So it's their job to really scope the work and the deliverables and the work outputs that the rest of the team, needs to get done. When you sign up for a project with a client or a customer, you basically agree to be able to say, over the course of this period of time, we're going to produce these things for you. And it's that job of the engagement manager to make sure that your team is hitting those milestones. But there is a little bit of magic that's involved in terms of being able to actually get what you said you were going to do done on time in the right way. And so that's where the engagement manager really comes in and plays a really critical role in terms of being able to scope the project appropriately, making sure the right people are assigned to the right tasks or the right deliverables, being able to communicate that with the client too, to make sure that the expectations are set of, hey, this is when the meeting is going to be where we're going to present the findings, or, hey, we need to make sure that we have all these interviews done that you want so that we can hit these deadlines. And so that role is typically someone who does have more experience, maybe not as much as a partner managing director, but also in many cases, this is someone who does have an advanced degree, such as an MBA. Not always, but at a lot of places, you typically tend to see that. The third role you typically have is kind of like a work stream lead. And this sometimes can take the form of a title of associate or senior associate or even senior consultant. And this is one of the folks on the engagement who they do a lot of the work, right? The heavy lifting in terms of, if you're doing a whole bunch of analysis, they often will lead that analysis that's being done. And these are typically tend to be, not always, but tend to be a few more years out of the undergraduate experience, up to maybe 5 to 8 years out of college. And so it's their job to kind of get a lot of the heavy lifting of the work that's done. And then the last role is kind of the entry level role, or the analyst, or in some cases it's called an associate. But that's probably, for your listeners at least, that's probably the closest role to what your listeners are probably going to be aiming for, and certainly what you come in as when you come out of college. This is the entry level role where you're on the team working with the senior associate or the senior consultant, working with the engagement manager and the managing director on that case team to go and complete the work that needs to be done. And so in terms of your question about how big is a team, it certainly depends a little bit in terms of the scope of the work. I have been on teams that have been 4 people, and I've been on teams that have been 200 people. Now, the nature of what was getting done and the nature of what we're trying to achieve varied in different cases. But, in both of those kinds of things, I think the most important thing I think for your listeners and your followers to know is that you're on a team with a bunch of people who have diverse skill sets and experiences. Mm-hmm. And I think the most important thing that you can do, particularly if you're in college right now, is to truly understand what is the role of an analyst like, and what would I be doing in that role? And if I were to be doing that role, number one, is it something that I would enjoy doing? Number two, are the skill sets that are needed to do that role things that I have right now or that I need to go out and acquire? And number three, is that something that I would like to, I could see myself focusing on? And so I think that's the most important thing.
So moving on to question 3, breaking into management consulting. So if I'm a student, how do I break in? What major should I look to do, GPA, et cetera?
It's a good question. And I think the great thing about a field like consulting is that people come in from very diverse educational backgrounds. And as an example, I was a marketing and theology major, and I found my way into consulting. I worked with people some of my classmates who joined Deloitte with me when I started out at BC, they were in CSOM. And I had some other ones who were from more traditional kinds of liberal arts backgrounds as well. I think the fundamental theme through all of that, though, is that you have a genuine interest in business and business acumen. And so what I mean by that is that consulting firms, they serve businesses for the most part, right? I mean, there's certainly some specialties in terms of nonprofit or some other sectors, but like fundamentally they serve business. And so regardless of what you're studying, you need to have a general curiosity or interest in business. And certainly that can take the form of being in CSOM and studying finance. But certainly there are plenty of people in the Morris College who are interested in business as well. So it really doesn't, it matters less about what you study and more about your general interest. And I do think there are ways, if you are not in CSOM, to be able to take business classes, and certainly would encourage that. But in today's digital age, it's never been easier to learn something. So even if you're not necessarily taking a CSOM class, plenty of other ways to explore businesses. But fundamentally, you need to have some coursework or some expertise or interest in business. I think another thing to really think about in terms of how to breaking in is being able to think about what skills, and I talked about this earlier, the skills that are important to being a consultant. Those can be gained in the classroom, but they can also be gained outside of the classroom, which matters less about what you're studying and more about what you're interested in. Some of the best skills that I learned to being a consultant were because I was involved in UGBC, or because I was involved in being an orientation leader or a resident assistant or working on a service trip. And if any of your listeners are, listening and they're traditional or they're very similar to the BC students that I know, you're probably involved in at least one of those, if not many. So those are great experiences to build all the skills that I mentioned in terms of being able to collaborate on teams, being able to communicate effectively, being able to analyze information and come up with conclusions. I did that all the time when I was in UGBC, and I'm sure many of you are doing that now. And so I think a very tactical thing that you can do in terms of thinking about how to break into consulting is to actually understand what are some of the things that a consultant would do on a project, and then how could I build some of those skills through my extracurricular activities, or how could I build those skills through some of the courses that I take? So very tactically, one of the things you definitely should do in terms of breaking in, many of you are probably doing some kind of informational interviews, but when you do your next one with someone who is a consultant, go and find out from them, what is a work product that you work on, or what is a deliverable that you have to produce? And then what are the skills you need to do that? And then think about, well, how could I replicate that inside of the classroom, working maybe on a group project or working with my club or organization? I think that's a very, very real tactical thing that anyone could do if they're interested in consulting. Now, and when it comes to like actually doing this at school, the great news is that BC is very well positioned. They have many relationships with many of the top large management consulting firms, Deloitte included, where I worked. And so there are, traditional processes you can follow with that. And certainly I think your career center could probably help you out with that. I do believe there is a management consulting club. So you should definitely check out with them. And there are lots of alum who work at these consulting firms, right? And so being able to talk to them and do informational interviews with them, I presume that many of them came into consulting from BC. And so they can kind of walk you through what that recruiting process was like. But in addition to that, there may have been some who maybe didn't come through the traditional recruiting process. So they might have some insight that they can also share with you. But one of the best ways to break in is to find out how the other people who have already done it did it and what made them successful. And so a very tactical thing is to really learn from them what they did and what made them successful. So that's another way to break in. And the last thing I would say is that if you are considering one of those larger companies, they do have full-on BC recruiting teams. And so when it comes time for internship or full-time recruiting, one of the best things that you can do is to build relationships with the people on the team, get to know them a little bit better. And they do purposely go out of their way to make sure that they have younger alumni who most recently graduated, participate in these so that, you can talk to them and get a better sense from them. So you should absolutely be thinking about that if you are interested in this field.
So Al, moving on to question 4, what made your management consulting firm unique?
Sure. Yeah. So I spent 5.5 years at Deloitte Consulting, a couple after I graduated from BC, and then a couple more after I graduated from my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill. And Deloitte was a phenomenal firm. I truly enjoyed my experience there. To this day, some of my, in addition to my best friends coming from BC, some of my best friends in my life, I worked with at Deloitte. And in some cases, some of my best friends are people I went to school with at BC and also worked at Deloitte. And so Deloitte is very much a part of my life. So for me, at least, I loved being able to go to Deloitte right out of undergrad because I was coming in with a class and a cohort, and being able to come in with other people who were experiencing the same thing that I was super valuable. Because you weren't doing it alone. And there were certainly people you could kind of go to be like, hey, what's this? Or, hey, how do I do that? Particularly when you're more junior and sometimes you're a little bit more afraid of maybe asking the stupid question, but coming in with a peer class like made it really valuable. Every company talks about company culture and what makes their company culture great. And I really jived with Deloitte's culture. It was very collaborative. But in addition to that, one of the things that really made Deloitte unique for me was that the people there really cared about investing in other people and relationships, or at least the people that I worked with. And so it was not uncommon for me to, particularly on Fridays, which were the days when you weren't traveling, to spend connecting with colleagues or friends, trying to figure out what they were working on, what they did, what they were up to, and things like that. And people are always central to my experience of my life, but central to my experience at BC. So that was something that really resonated with me when I got to Deloitte. And I think the other thing that really was valuable about Deloitte, and I would also argue maybe other large management consulting firms, is that consulting is very much built on an apprenticeship model. And what that means is that people working in a consulting firm, they train each other and they coach each other and they mentor each other. And there's a very real reason for why you need to do that. And the reason why is because, particularly for if you're coming out of undergrad, while you may be very smart and while you may be very hardworking, you don't have the work experience that your other colleagues do. But if they invest some time into teaching you and coaching you and training you, you can learn some of those things. And the more that you learn is the more that you can do. And the more that you can do, the more that your manager and the managing director can focus on other things. And the more you can grow as a person too. And I found in my time at Deloitte, every time I raised my hand and asked for something to learn or asked for some guidance about how I could stretch and grow, there were always people that were there to help me. And so I think that's another thing that was great about Deloitte, is that if you are going to be proactive about your career, if you're going to really drive your own development, if you're going to really set your own goals, working at a company like Deloitte that's big, that has lots of resources and that has lots of people, is a phenomenal place to be. But the key there is really taking ownership of it. And there is a trite saying at Deloitte, but it still is true to this day, of this idea of you have to own your career. And what that means is that you have to be the one that sets the goals and says, this is what I'm looking to achieve. And you have to put in the work to find out what that means for you. But when you do that, there will be people who will open doors for you. There will be people who will take the time to learn, to teach you. There will be people that will introduce you to other people who can teach you things and give you experiences. But it's on you to really drive that. And I'm someone who has always been passionate about that. And as a result, I was fortunate to have always had people who opened doors for me. And so those are just some of the reasons why I had a great experience at Deloitte. But, I think for your listeners, I think the most important thing, regardless of which firm it is like, number one, what are the people like? And are these the types of people that I want to spend 12 to 14 hours a day with, working with, learning from, growing with? Number two, do the company's values and what they do really align with my own values and my own actions? And I think that's something that's really, really important today more than ever. And then I would say number three, is this a company that is going to help me develop and grow? I think that is probably the most important thing for your listeners to think about coming out of undergrad. Where you go out of undergrad probably will not be the company you stay with for the rest of your career. And so if you can go somewhere that's going to help you learn and grow and help you build some foundational skills, that's going to help you figure out those next couple steps.
And question 5, to wrap this up, if I'm a student, what advice can you give me just to looking, what advice would you give me to that if I'm looking into your specific field?
Yeah, sure. So I think number one is make sure that you know the role, the skills that are needed to do the role, and maybe a little bit around what the first couple of years of a career would look like in this. And that it actually aligns with both your interests as well as things you could be good at. You don't have to necessarily be good at them now, but like things you could be capable of being good at. I think fundamentally, we have to do jobs that use our strengths, but also that we're interested in. And so being able to learn what that is, but also to think about if it would make sense for you, number one, first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is I would think about what is the type of company that I want to work at? And what are some of the characteristics or qualities, of that? I think now more than ever, it's really important, I think, for a lot of people to work for companies whose values and beliefs kind of align with their own, particularly if you have the privilege and opportunity to be able to ask for that. And so I would start thinking about that. Very similar in the way I'm sure some of you thought about where you wanted to spend your 4 years for college. What makes sense for you? What are the types of qualities of characteristics of not only the company that you want to work for, but maybe the people that you want to work with. I think that's something that's really, really important. In the spirit of the Ignatian values, it's worth spending some time reflecting on it and kind of making sense for you. And then maybe I would say the last piece of advice I would give is if number one, the first two pieces of advice make sense to you, my last piece of advice is to think about what you can do right now to help you get closer towards that goal of landing a consulting internship or landing a full-time opportunity for a consulting firm. And for some of you, it may be taking on a project to help you build some skills. For others of you, it may be doing some informational interviews with some recent VC alum who work at these firms to better understand what they're doing. For some of you, it might be setting up a virtual appointment with Andrew or someone else in the Career Center to talk a little bit more and understand what the recruiting process is going to look like this fall for some of these firms. But I always think action is really important. So if you agree that number one and number two make sense for you, number three is to figure out what is the most immediate action you can take that can help you get you closer to that goal.
Al, you made some great points, and I really appreciate having you on the Fulton Career Cast today. If I'm a student, if I want to reach out, your conversation has been great. What's the best way I can get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly find me on LinkedIn. Name's Al D. You can also, I run a website called MBA Schooled. It is a blog that is meant to be a guide for MBA students and really focuses on helping MBA students grow in their careers. I will tell you that I've been writing on this for 5 years, and the most popular article on my website for the past 5 years is a blog that is titled, "Here is How to Break into the Management Consulting Industry." So I would definitely read that because it will have some good advice in there for you. And then I also, I can level with you, Andrew, a little bit. I have my own podcast as well. And so it's called MBA Insider. It very much mirrors a little bit of what I talk about on MBA School, but it's an inside guide to understanding business school and how people are using business school to grow in their careers. And while that may be a little bit early for some of your listeners, if you are interested in thinking about what business school could be like, it's a great place to hear what that experience is like, and to also hear directly from current MBA students about what their experience is. So those are all the many ways in which you can kind of engage further.
Great resources. We will make sure to have links to all of those in the show notes. Al, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
#WeAreBC, #SOAR.
Hashtag get in.